My name is Aldric. For years I believed I had a solid marriage, the kind that could weather any storm. My wife, Lillian, and I had been together for over a decade. We built a life together, sharing dreams, laughter, and what I thought was a deep, unbreakable bond. That's why I never expected everything to unravel in one single evening. It was a charity gala. One of those upscale events with too much champagne, too much small talk, and a dance floor in the center of the room where couples floated under the glow of chandeliers. I wasn't much of a social butterfly, but Lillian loved these events, and I loved seeing her happy. She looked stunning that night. Her emerald green dress shimmered under the golden lights, her dark hair cascading in waves over her shoulders. She was the kind of woman who could make heads turn without even trying. And yet, for years I believed she was mine alone, that no matter how many men noticed her, she would always come back to me. That illusion shattered the moment I saw her on the dance floor. Started subtly, like a whisper in the back of my mind. A man approached her, a stranger, or at least I thought so at first. He was tall, confident, the kind of guy who carried himself like he belonged in the center of attention. I was standing at the bar, mid-conversation with an old colleague, when I caught the moment their eyes met. There was a spark, something I recognized immediately but refused to accept. A slow song started playing, and before I could react, he took her hand, and she let him. I expected her to glance at me, to acknowledge my presence, to at least offer a silent reassurance that this was nothing. But she didn't. Instead, she moved with him, swaying in his arms, as if I didn't exist. I waited for her to pull away. I waited for her to remember that I was there. But she never did. The way she smiled at him, the way she let his hand rest on her waist. It wasn't the kind of dance you share with just anyone. It was intimate, familiar. My stomach twisted as I realized something gut-wrenching. This wasn't just some stranger. She knew him, and worse, she wanted him. I could have made a scene. I could have walked up, interrupted them, demanded an explanation. But something in me refused to do that. A deeper pain settled in my chest, the kind of pain that told me this had been building for a long time. This wasn't a single moment of betrayal. It was just the first time I was seeing it with my own eyes. So I turned around, and I walked away. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an argument. I just left. And that's when she realized her mistake. Because the moment I disappeared through the doors of that ballroom, my absence became louder than my presence ever was. And she regretted it. The cold air hit me the moment I stepped outside. It was the kind of night where the sky stretched endlessly above, clear and full of stars, yet I felt like I was suffocating. The sound of muffled music from the ballroom buzzed in the background, but I was too numb to care. My hands trembled as I loosened my tie, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I wasn't sure where I was going. I just knew I needed to leave. My feet carried me forward, away from the golden glow of the venue, away from the image of Lillian in another man's arms. A part of me kept waiting for her to come running after me, to realize what she had done, to chase after me like in some grand romantic gesture that would somehow make this all go away. But she didn't. She stayed. That silence, her choice to continue dancing instead of coming after me, cut deeper than any argument ever could. It confirmed what I had been too blind to see for months, maybe even years. This wasn't just a fleeting moment. This wasn't just a dance. This was a crack in the foundation that had been there all along, and I had been too foolish to notice. I made it to my car before my hands started shaking uncontrollably. My breath hitched in my throat as the reality of it all started sinking in. The way she looked at him, the way she moved in his arms. It wasn't awkward or unfamiliar, it was natural. Too natural. As if she had danced with him before. As if I was the outsider in my own marriage. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I could hear the echo of my father's words in my head from years ago, back when I had first told him I was going to marry Lillian. Love isn't just about passion, son. It's about knowing that when you're not in the room, your wife still protects your name. But tonight, in that ballroom, my name didn't exist. I didn't exist. The weight of it all pressed against my chest, making it impossible to breathe. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do. Do I turn around and confront her? Do I wait for her to come home and pretend like I hadn't seen it? Do I act like the fool she clearly thinks I am? No, I couldn't do that. Instead, I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life. My mind was spinning with 1,000 thoughts, but only one thing was clear. I couldn't just sit there and let this consume me. I needed to know the truth. Because if Lillian had already crossed that line, if she had already emotionally checked out of our marriage, then I needed to know how deep the betrayal ran. And so, instead of going home, I drove. Not away from the problem, but straight toward the answers. I don't know how long I drove. The city blurred past me, neon signs and streetlights flashing like silent witnesses to my unraveling thoughts. My mind was a battlefield, anger, confusion, betrayal, and a deep, crushing sadness all warring for control. I kept seeing them, over and over again, twirling under the golden lights, her lips curling into a smile that wasn't meant for me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight that my fingers ached, but I didn't care. I needed to get away from that image, from the suffocating realization that my wife had chosen someone else in front of me and she didn't even have the decency to hide it. I found myself parked in front of a bar. Not a fancy one, not the kind of place where people went to socialize or be seen. It was one of those quiet corners of the city where men sat alone with their thoughts, drowning whatever haunted them in the bottom of a glass. I wasn't a drinker, never had been. But that night, I needed something, anything, to quiet the chaos in my head. The bartender, a middle-aged guy with tired eyes, gave me a knowing nod as I slid onto the stool. "Long night," he asked, pouring a whiskey before I even said a word. I exhaled, shaking my head. "You have no idea." He didn't push for details, just slid the glass toward me and went back to cleaning. It was strange, the way strangers could sometimes sense things better than the people closest to you. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the amber liquid in my glass, not really drinking, just thinking. The longer I sat, the more the reality of the night pressed down on me. This wasn't just about a dance. It was about what it represented. Because a woman who loved her husband wouldn't dance with another man like that. A woman who respected her marriage wouldn't look at someone else the way Lillian had looked at him. And a husband who meant something to his wife wouldn't have been ignored. I ran a hand over my face, my mind circling the same question over and over again. Had this been happening for a long time, and I had just been too blind to see it? I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen. No messages. No missed calls. No frantic texts asking where I was. Nothing. And that's when the truth hit me like a sledgehammer. She wasn't worried about me. She wasn't chasing after me, calling to apologize, trying to explain. Because she didn't care. And maybe she hadn't for a long time. That realization burned more than the whiskey I finally forced myself to sip. I needed answers. Real ones. Not just my own assumptions, not just the tortured replaying of the night in my head. I pulled up my messages and scrolled down until I found a name I hadn't reached out to in years. Someone who might have answers. Someone who might have seen what I hadn't. Jared. My oldest friend. The best man at my wedding. The one person who had always seen through people better than I did. I hesitated for a moment, then finally typed out the message. "I need to ask you something. And I need the truth. No matter how much it hurts." I hit send. And then I waited. The bar felt colder as I waited. My phone sat on the counter, the screen dark except for the message I had just sent. Jared wasn't the type to leave people on read. If he saw my message, he would reply. And if he didn't, well, maybe that would say more than anything else. I took another sip of the whiskey, my mind spiraling through every possible scenario. Was I overreacting? Had I let my emotions get the best of me? Maybe it really was just a dance. Maybe she hadn't meant anything by it. Maybe I was the one turning it into something bigger than it was. But then I thought about the way she looked at him. The way she didn't look at me. That wasn't nothing. And the fact that she still hadn't called or texted to check on me. That was the final nail in the coffin. A buzz against the wooden counter jolted me back to reality. I grabbed my phone, my pulse spiking as I saw Jared's name pop up. "Where are you? We need to talk. Now." There was no hesitation in his words. No casual, "What's up?" or "Everything okay?" Just pure urgency. I stared at the screen for a second before replying. "At Milligan's. Come alone." He didn't answer, but I knew he was already on his way. I downed the rest of my drink and motioned for the bartender. "One more." He raised an eyebrow. "Rough night?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Something like that." The truth was, I had no idea what kind of night this was turning into. All I knew was that something about Lillian's behavior had flipped a switch inside me, and I wasn't just going to let it go. 15 minutes later, Jared walked in. He looked the same as always, broad shoulders, sharp eyes, the kind of guy who never missed a detail. He spotted me immediately, crossing the room with purpose before sliding into the seat across from me. "Talk," I said, cutting straight to the point. Jared exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "I was hoping you'd never ask me this, man." A sharp chill crawled down my spine. "What does that mean?" He hesitated, like he was debating whether to say what was on his mind. And then, finally, he met my eyes. "It means I've known for a while, but I didn't know how to tell you." The bar around us faded. The clinking of glasses, the low hum of conversations, the music playing faintly from the speakers, it all blurred into the background. I felt like I had been sucker punched. "Known what, Jared?" My voice was eerily calm, but my hands were clenched into fists under the table. He let out a long breath. "That wasn't the first time she's danced with him." The words landed like bricks on my chest. I swallowed hard. "How long?" Jared's expression darkened. "Months. Maybe longer." I didn't have proof, just suspicions. But tonight? That confirmed everything. I forced myself to breathe, to stay composed. "Who is he?" Jared hesitated again, but this time I wasn't in the mood for patience. "Jared, don't make me ask again." He sighed. "His name's Dominic. Works in finance, met Lillian through one of those charity organizations she's involved with. They got close fast. Too fast." I leaned back in my chair, staring blankly at the wall. Dominic. I didn't recognize the name, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he knew my wife in a way I hadn't realized. 1,000 thoughts crashed through my head at once. Did she love him? Had she been lying to me this whole time? How many nights had she come home, kissed me, and pretended everything was fine while secretly thinking about him? I clenched my jaw. "Does he know about me?" Jared gave me a look that answered my question before he even spoke. "Oh, he knows." The weight of those words settled over me like a suffocating fog. This wasn't just an affair that happened in the shadows, hidden away in secrecy. This was something worse. Something calculated. Dominic knew about me. And he didn't care. And neither did my wife. Jared's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer yet. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. I sat there, gripping the edge of the table as Jared's words sank in. Months. Maybe longer. That meant while I had been waking up next to her, sharing meals, laughing at inside jokes, and believing we were still a team, she had been living a different reality entirely. One where I was an afterthought. One where another man had taken a space that was supposed to belong to me. The thought made my stomach churn, a deep, burning nausea curling in my gut. I looked at Jared, my best friend, the guy who had been there for me since college, and I could see the weight in his expression. He had known, or at least suspected, and he had said nothing. I wasn't angry at him. Not yet. I was still too caught up in the hurricane of my own emotions to direct my fury at anyone but her. I pushed my glass away, suddenly disgusted by the thought of numbing myself. I needed clarity, not fog. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice steady but low. Jared ran a hand through his hair, hesitating. "Look, man, I wasn't sure at first. But then I started seeing things. Lillian started canceling plans, saying she was too tired to go out, but then I'd see pictures of her at events with that guy. I didn't know if you knew about him, if maybe it was innocent, but it didn't look innocent." I clenched my jaw. "And you never thought to tell me?" He exhaled heavily. "I didn't want to wreck your marriage if I was wrong. I needed proof, and I didn't have it." I nodded slowly, but the betrayal still stung. Not just hers, his too. I stood up abruptly, grabbing my coat. "I have to go." Jared's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist before I could step away. "Wait. Don't do something stupid." I yanked my arm free, leveling him with a hard stare. "I've already been stupid, Jared. For too damn long." Then I left. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, my knuckles white. The city lights streaked past my windows, but all I could see was her. Lillian. Laughing. Dancing. Letting another man put his hands on her. How long had she been living this double life? And why the hell had I been so blind? By the time I pulled into our driveway, my heartbeat was a thunderous roar in my ears. The house was dark except for a single light in the living room. That meant she was home. She had returned from the gala without ever once calling or texting me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to steady the chaos inside me. I wasn't going to storm in and start screaming. No. That would be too easy for her. If she was lying to me, if she had been lying this entire time, then I wanted to hear it from her mouth. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Lillian was on the couch, still in her emerald dress, curled up with a glass of wine. She looked up when she heard me, her face momentarily flashing with surprise. "Aldric, you're home." That was it. No frantic questions about where I had gone. No guilt, no worry. Just those 3 empty words. I shut the door slowly, locking eyes with her. Yeah, I said, my voice calm. I'm home. She tilted her head, studying me. Are you okay? You left so suddenly. I let out a quiet laugh, one that had no humor in it. Suddenly? Lillian, I walked away because you were too busy dancing with another man to notice I even existed. Something flickered across her face, guilt? Annoyance? It was hard to tell. She set down her wine glass, straightening her posture. It was just a dance, Aldric. You're making a big deal out of nothing. There it was. The dismissal. The casual brushing off of everything I had felt, everything I had seen. I stepped closer, watching her carefully. Who is he? She blinked. What? The man you were dancing with. Who is he? Lillian shifted uncomfortably, and that was all the answer I needed. If it was really nothing, she would have laughed it off. If it was innocent, she wouldn't have hesitated. She reached for her wine again, taking a slow sip before answering. Just someone I know from the charity board. Just someone. The same way I was just her husband, apparently. I nodded, letting the silence stretch between us. I could see her getting nervous now, shifting under the weight of my gaze. Good. I wasn't going to let her twist this into me overreacting. I wasn't going to let her make me feel like the crazy one. I talked to Jared tonight, I said finally. Lillian's fingers tightened around her glass, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. Oh. He told me this isn't the first time you've danced with him. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I don't know what Jared thinks he knows, but... No, I cut her off. No excuses. No pretty little lies. Just tell me the truth, Lillian. Do you love him? The room went still. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. That moment of hesitation felt like a gunshot to my chest. That was my answer. I let out a slow breath, nodding to myself. All right. Her brows furrowed. All right? That's all you have to say. I met her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I saw her for who she really was. Not the woman I had married. Not the woman I had built a life with. Just a stranger in my home. No, I said quietly. That's not all I have to say. And then, without another word, I turned and walked away. I walked down the hallway, my own footsteps sounding foreign in the house I had called home for years. The walls felt smaller, the air heavier, like the very foundation of this place knew what was happening before I did. My mind wasn't racing anymore, it had settled into something eerily calm, a numbness that sat in my chest like a cold stone. Behind me, Lillian didn't move. I could feel her eyes on my back, waiting, expecting me to turn around, to demand an explanation, to fight for her like some desperate fool who didn't know when he'd already lost. But I didn't turn. Because this wasn't about fighting anymore. This wasn't about proving a point, about yelling or demanding apologies that wouldn't mean a damn thing. This was about accepting what I had been too blind to see for far too long. When I reached her bedroom, I didn't slam the door. I didn't throw anything, didn't punch a wall like some broken-hearted man who couldn't control his rage. No, my anger wasn't loud. It was silent. Heavy. The kind of anger that settled deep in your bones and never left. I opened the closet and pulled out a suitcase. And that's when I heard it, her footsteps approaching, hesitant but deliberate. She stopped in the doorway, her silhouette outlined in the dim glow from the hallway. Aldric, what are you doing? Her voice had changed. It wasn't defensive anymore. It was cautious, unsure. I didn't answer right away. I focused on methodically pulling out clothes, folding them, setting them neatly in the suitcase. It wasn't much, just enough for a few nights. Because I needed space. I needed air. And I sure as hell wasn't going to sleep in the same bed as the woman who had just hesitated when I asked if she loved another man. Aldric, she tried again, stepping closer this time. Can we talk about this? I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head as I zipped the suitcase shut. Now you want to talk? I finally turned to face her. Where was that when I walked out of that gala? She flinched as if the memory of it finally caught up to her. I didn't know what to say. I studied her for a moment. The way she shifted on her feet, the way her fingers twisted together in front of her. There was regret there, but not the kind I wanted to see. It wasn't regret for hurting me. It was regret for getting caught. You still haven't answered my question, I said, my voice quieter now. Do you love him? She swallowed, her gaze darting to the floor. I don't know. That was it. That was all she had to say. I let out a breath, rubbing a hand over my face. You don't know. I repeated, as if saying it again would somehow make it less pathetic. How the hell do you not know, Lillian? Either you do or you don't. She finally looked up at me, her eyes glistening with something I couldn't quite name. I didn't plan for any of this to happen, she whispered. It just did. I laughed again, but this time it wasn't even bitter. It was just empty. Yeah. That makes two of us. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and brushed past her. She reached out, her fingers grazing my arm. Please, she murmured. Just stay. Let's figure this out. I stopped, just for a second. Just long enough to let her words sink in. And then I turned my head slightly. I think you already did. And with that I walked out. The night air hit me the moment I stepped outside, crisp and cold against my skin. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle. My car was parked in the driveway, waiting, but for the first time in a long time I had no idea where I was supposed to go. I could go to a hotel, sure. I could go back to that bar, sit in the dark with a glass of whiskey and let my thoughts spiral until the sun came up. Or I could drive. Just keep driving until the city lights faded into nothing, until I didn't have to think about the fact that my wife had just admitted to feeling something for another man. But no matter where I went, the truth would still be the same. Lillian had already left me a long time ago. I was just now catching up. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me back. I pulled it out and stared at the screen. Jared. I hesitated, then answered. Yeah? His voice was quiet but firm. Where are you? I exhaled. Leaving. A pause. Then, you coming here? I frowned. Where's here? Jared sighed. I'm at a diner. Figured you'd need some food. And someone to talk to. I glanced back at the house, the warm light still spilling from the windows, the silhouette of Lillian standing just inside. For a split second, I wondered if she'd come after me. If she'd run out, grab my hand, beg me to stay. But she didn't. I turned back toward my car. Yeah, I said, pulling open the door. Text me the address. And then I drove. Not toward the past, but toward whatever the hell came next. The city lights blurred past me as I drove, my mind a storm of thoughts I couldn't quite silence. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, the tension in my body refusing to ease even as I forced myself to focus on the road. Jared's message had already come through, some old diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that stayed open all night and served coffee strong enough to keep ghosts away. I needed that. Because Lillian's ghost was haunting me already. Not the woman herself, she was very much alive, probably still standing in our house, staring at the empty doorway where I had walked out. No, it wasn't her physical presence that clung to me like an unwanted weight. It was the memories, the years we had spent building something I thought was unbreakable. It was the realization that all of it, the laughter, the late-night talks, the small, stupid moments of affection, had meant nothing in the end. I had been fighting for something she had already abandoned. That was the real betrayal. Not just the dance, not just the man she had let put his hands on her. It was the fact that she hadn't even tried to stop me when I left. The diner's neon sign flickered as I pulled into the lot, its bright glow casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. I spotted Jared through the window, already seated in a booth, a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up when I stepped inside, giving me a nod before gesturing to the seat across from him. I slid into the booth without a word. The smell of coffee and grease filled the air, familiar and grounding in a way I hadn't expected. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, appeared at my side almost instantly, setting down a menu I didn't bother looking at. Coffee, I muttered. Black. She nodded and walked away. Jared studied me for a moment before leaning forward. You look like hell. I let out a dry laugh. Feel like it too. He didn't push, didn't ask if I was okay. He knew better than that. Instead, he took a sip of his coffee, watching me over the rim of his cup. So, what now? I stared at the table, tracing an invisible pattern across the worn surface. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Jared sighed, setting his cup down with a quiet clink. I don't know what you want me to say, man. You walked out, but she didn't run after you. That tells you everything you need to know. I nodded, swallowing against the lump in my throat. Yeah, it does. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. The waitress returned with my coffee, setting it down without a word before disappearing again. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. You think she's going to call? I asked, my voice quieter now. Jared exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. I don't know, Aldric. But if she does, are you gonna pick up? I didn't answer right away. Because I wasn't sure I wanted to hear whatever excuse she would come up with. Was she regretting it? Did she even care? Or was she relieved that I had made the decision for her? I took a slow sip of coffee, my thoughts still tangled in the mess of what had been my marriage. I guess we'll find out. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. I don't know how long I sat there, staring into my coffee as if the swirling liquid held the answers to everything. The diner hummed with quiet conversations, the occasional clatter of plates breaking the silence between Jared and me. It was strange, just a few hours ago, my world had felt like it was collapsing in on itself, but now, in this simple, quiet moment, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Relief. For years, I had been trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through my fingers. I had convinced myself that love meant endurance, that marriage meant weathering the storms no matter how strong. But what I hadn't realized was that Lillian had stopped standing in that storm with me a long time ago. I had been fighting alone. And now I wasn't fighting anymore. My phone vibrated on the table. Jared and I both glanced at it at the same time. The name flashing across the screen made my stomach clench. Lillian. Jared exhaled sharply. Well, there it is. I stared at the phone, letting it buzz against the table. My fingers twitched, but I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to hear whatever excuses she had prepared, whatever damage control she was about to attempt. Because for the first time since this all started, I knew the truth. She wasn't calling because she wanted to fix things. She was calling because she had lost control of the situation. And I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of thinking I was still waiting for her. I silenced the call, shoving the phone back into my pocket. Jared raised an eyebrow. Not gonna answer? I shook my head. No. I don't need to hear it. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Good. For the first time that night, I let out a breath that didn't feel like it was carrying the weight of the world. I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip, savoring the warmth. The air felt lighter, the weight on my chest lifting inch by inch. Lillian had made her choice. And now I was making mine. I wasn't going to let this break me. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define my future. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out what came next, whether that meant getting a lawyer, moving out, or rebuilding my life from scratch. But tonight, I was just going to sit in this diner, drink my coffee, and enjoy the simple fact that I was free. And for the first time in years, I truly felt free.